Yes, so thanks everybody for taking the time to come along tonight to my talk on birds and trees of Shankill Graveyard. My name is Anthony McCluskey and I actually grew up in Shankill Street, very close to the graveyard. Now, my background is not with birds and trees at all, it is with insects. So I work in insect conservation. So I'll be learning a few things tonight myself, but hopefully you find this interesting. And as I mentioned, I grew up in Shankill Street, and this was the view from my bedroom window, basically. I could look down the street and I could see the huge trees of Shankill Graveyard with the big gate. Now, it was good to know then that there was a little gate around the side that we could use to get in because we could never get in the front gate. But Shankill Graveyard has always been there and it's been there for a very long time, as many of you know. Now, my interest with the graveyard as well was also inspired by my granduncle. This is my granduncle, Peter Lurgan, who died a few years ago, sadly, but he was a great one for telling stories. So he would have always taken us around the graveyard and told us all the stories about people like Marjorie McCall, lived once, they're buried twice, Cubbage, and other things within the graveyard. So Peter really gave us all permission to actually access the place and to enjoy it, but to respect it as well. And Peter was a gardener and groundskeeper, so he also taught me about the plants and animals found there. So really, this talk is a bit of a tribute to Peter tonight for all he's did for everybody. But then as I grew up, I began to get more interested in wildlife and I did my degree at Queen's University, where I studied bees and other insects. And then whenever I was studying, actually, the best stress reliever for me was to just go for a 15-minute walk around the graveyard and clear my head. And it was great. So it's a really great resource for people living in the area. But it does go back a long way, and this is one of the earliest photos I found for it. It's from the old Lurgan Photos Facebook page. This apparently was taken in 1907, and you can see the mausoleum there. But also look how small the trees are. Well, you might notice, first of all, the trees in the background, those lime trees, they seem to have been around for a very long time. But there's also some yew trees, and those yew trees are huge now, but here they're quite small. So that might suggest that they're not as old as some people might think they are, but I'll talk a bit about those later. Then we have a photo from the 1960s, and those yews are still a bit small, and the trees are always there. See how big they are. And then a photo more recently, this one was taken, this one was on the Facebook page, and you can see very little has changed except some of the trees, the yew trees have got bigger. But just tend to reflect what it looks like recently in the snow. And if we just have a look at that image, you can see really just the yew trees have got a bit bigger, but the whole structure of the graveyard is much the same. And if you look at it on Google Maps as well, you can see it here with the wall around it. But if you look back on the old maps from a very long time ago, you can see that it's still there and marked out. This is from the Ordnance Survey maps from 1832 to 1846. And you can see it marked out perfectly in the same shape that it is now with the mausoleum. Well, this might have been a church there at that time, but where the mausoleum is now was an old church, but with the lines of trees the whole way around it. So some of these trees possibly date from back around that time. Also note, there's what we call Shankill Street is still there now, but there's a glebe with a pond and a river running down into it, which might explain why people living in this area are constantly flooded. There could well be a river still running through that place that we don't know about. But we've got some fantastic images of it from above, and you can see the extent of the trees and the plantings, and you can really appreciate the scale of Shankill Graveyard from the air, and just then to look again what it's like on the old maps. So really not a lot has changed in its structure. And I had a friend, Rachel, who sent me some photos the other day because she knew I was doing this talk. The photo on the right with the man and the kids and the dog, she says that was taken in the 1930s. And this is basically behind the house where I grew up. Now, a lot has changed there. You know, it's a bit more fixed up now. But looking down this area is what we call the backs. And the backs are kind of a nice communal area for people. But you can still see the trees. In the other photos, you can still see the trees. And for me, they are a real Lurgan landmark. And I think they're a very important part of our heritage that more people need to know about. So we'll start talking about the birds, which mostly do live in the trees, but there are some which don't. And we'll start with one of my favorites, and one you might see at this time of year, called the wren. Now, the wren is a chirpy wee thing. They're very argumentative. If you're walking along, you might get one following you and chirping its wee heart out. But they're some of the smallest native birds. And its scientific name is troglodytes, which means cave dweller. And this is because they're often associated with dark places. So I reckon that in some of those tombs and places like that, those little wrens could be nesting because they nest close to the ground. Yet they're also known as the fabled king of birds. And I'll not go into the whole story, but there's a story that Centuries ago, whenever the birds were trying to decide who would be their king, they decided that whoever could fly the highest would be their king. So they all flew the highest, and the one who could fly the highest was the eagle. But as he got to the top and began to fly down again, what he didn't realize was that the little wren had tucked himself underneath the eagle's wing. So he flew slightly higher and he became the king of the birds. So sneaky little wren. They explore shady areas close to the ground, and they eat spiders and insects with that little sharp beak. The males actually make several nests in spring, and females will choose the one that they like the best. So sometimes I've found abandoned wren nests in the garden and thought that I might have scared them away, but it might well have just been one of the prototypes of these males that they've been trying to use to impress the females. So yeah, at least he does something to help out. Now, the goldcrests, these are the smallest bird in Ireland, weighing only 5 grams, which is about the same as a 20p coin. So they are amazing little birds. They mostly breed in pine woods. So if they're in Shankill Graveyard, it's possibly just the migrant ones which are coming in and roving around in winter. Yes, so they really do need the pine woods to nest. And we get up to 5 million of them migrating from Scandinavia to the UK and Ireland every year. And something which is only 5 grams, same weight as a 20p coin, the smallest bird in Ireland, doing that whole huge trip, I think is just amazing. So you can tell the gold crest though, because it has this beautiful little golden crest on its head. And I should say that for the wren, they're small brown birds, but you'll often see their little tail up like this. So it really is, you know, it's looking for a fight a lot of the time, and you can often tell by that tail being poked up like that. A similar one to these is the tree creeper, and it gets its name because it creeps up and down trees. So it's a small bird, mostly brown in appearance, but you can see these really long claws. It uses these to grip onto the tree, and it will use its sharp beak to look for spiders and other little insects and things within the crevices of trees. These really like the lime trees off Shankill Graveyard because they really are full of crevices, and you'll get the tree creepers going up and down those trees. I've seen them there before. They probably do nest in Shankill Graveyard too, so it could be one to keep an eye out for at any time of year. We're on to other small birds now. So we'll start with the blue tit, and these are really distinctive because they've got a light blue cap with a yellow breast. So we'll start off with the cap. You can see it's really distinctive blue cap here. No other bird has that feature, so it's a really distinctive thing to have. These little white cheeks with a yellow breast with a black line down it. Now, they're quite a small bird. They nest in cavities such as holes in trees. So again, they're possibly nesting up way high up within the lime trees there. And they could be helped in Shankill Graveyard though by putting up some things like bird boxes, because often the limitation on bird populations is just lack of nesting space. So why not get a wee project to get people, maybe some people are bored and they have nothing else to do, get them to build some bird boxes and put them up around the graveyard and help the bird population out. Now, its close cousin then is the great tit. These are bigger indeed than the blue tits, and they're often more aggressive as well. So you'll see them kind of harassing other birds and just being the bullies. Whenever they land on the bird table, you'll see other birds scatter because the great tits just have that effect on other birds. Now, they have a glossy black cap with a strong black line down the breast. So you can see the black cap here with this really strong black line going down the center. And other small birds related to those are the coal tits. So again, the same size as the blue tit, but they're much less colourful. So they've got a tawny coloured breast with no line and a black cap. But they're really interesting with their nests. So they can nest in hollows, including mouse nests, but they then line the nest with moss and spider webs and wool. So they really want a comfortable nest to make. So they're really nice birds that way. But again, they're more associated with pine woods. But in the winter, you'll find that birds will begin to rove around looking for food. So you might see them within the graveyard at this time of year. Similar one to that then, in some ways, is the long-tailed tit. And some people call these flying lollipops because it's got such a long tail with a body, like a round body on top of it, that whenever they're in flight, they do look like lollipops flying through the air. And you can get them en masse at this time of year. They kind of rove around in groups with flocks of up to 20 birds, and they go through the hedgerows looking for food. So again, if it's not a bird which is nesting in Shankill Graveyard, it could be one which is using it at this time of year to find food. They've got really interesting nests, which are bottle-shaped within the fork of a tree, constructed from moss and cobwebs. However, again, they want to line their nest, so they can line up with up to 1,500 feathers, and they find these from outside, on the ground, or they can strip them from dead birds. So that's how far they will go to make a comfortable nest, and just right, I think. Now we're on to the finches. So one of the most distinctive is the goldfinch. They're most visible in winter as they form flocks. So you can often see them in large numbers, maybe 15 to 20 of them, flying from tree to tree. And what you'll notice though is the gold. This real beautiful flash of golden bright yellow as they fly is a real giveaway for the goldfinch. But if you see one up close, you'll see this really blood red face actually, which again gives them away too. So they feed upon the seeds of thistles, dandelions, and similar plants. So it's a message for when we're managing places, not to tidy up too much, because many of these winter birds depend upon those seeds. The greenfinch is closely related. It can be found anywhere with woods and hedges, but the numbers of goldfinches have declined seriously dramatically in recent years. There's an outbreak of a disease which can prevent them from feeding, and their whole face actually gets infected by it, and it really does look awful. So greenfinches depend upon places with scrub, so you'll find them near hawthorn or blackthorn and places like that. And we need more places like that to help birds like this. Then the bullfinch, so hard to miss with a bullfinch, and it gets its name because it looks just like a bull, really. It has no neck, so that's how the bullfinches get their name. They got this really striking coloration where it's pink and black. This is a male. Females are less brightly colored though. In some places they're regarded as being a pest, so you probably wouldn't like to see them around Loch Gall in the springtime, because they can damage fruit trees by actually eating the flower buds before they develop. So not everybody likes to see a bullfinch, but I do. And yeah, just look for them in hedges generally. Then the chaffinch, these are very common birds, especially if you feed birds in your garden, you're very likely to see the chaffinches. There's a male and a female shown there. And they're very abundant in many places, but again in winter, our numbers get boosted by migrants from Europe. The male's the most colourful, mostly red and orange hair with a grey cap. But the female, she's almost more like a greenfinch with an olive green appearance. And they readily come to garden feeders. So yeah, if you feed the birds, you might get the chaffinches coming in. And the sparrows, so our commonest would be the house sparrow. Now there's a tree sparrow, which is much rarer now and actually almost extinct in many places. But the house sparrow, sometimes you're walking past a hedge, like a beech hedge, and you'll hear the whole hedge just scrabbling and making lots of noises. That's very often the house sparrow, because they can nest in these large colonies and you'll just hear the whole hedge live with them. So the males and females, again, are quite different. The males have a black bib, as you can see here, with mostly grey appearance, but also grey on top of his head too. Yes, I look for these large, noisy groups inside hedges with a chattering sound. So that's the male and female house sparrow. But this is a species which is under great threat. They used to be very common, but they declined significantly in recent decades. They often nest in holes in buildings and also in thick ivy. And that can be a consideration for graveyards. I know we need to look after the monuments, but also be aware that ivy can be an important habitat for things. And ivy is doing no harm growing up trees. It doesn't kill them, but we probably do need to remove it from the monuments. But we should also be putting up bird boxes to replace the ivy we're taking down. Now, dunnocks and robins. So dunnocks aren't that common in many places, but it could be because they're very easy to overlook. They're small, brown, and mostly grey. So really not a lot of features to talk about there. They creep around as well near shrubs. For me, dunnocks represent free love. So they have a really unusual breeding system. The males can have multiple females, females can have multiple males, but they all care for the chicks together. So you can have several females raising broods, sometimes from different males altogether. So it's a bit of a mess, really. Dunnocks, whenever you look into them, it's not easy to categorize who's with who, but they get the job done and they raise their offspring communally. Now the robin then is roughly the same size as a dunnock, and they're very distinctive, so we don't need to tell anybody how to identify a robin. Males and females of robins do both have the red breast, so it's a myth that only the males have it. However, in the males, they actually grow a bigger red breast as they get older, and the more healthy males have a larger red breast too, and that is their first really communication with other males. They're using that to defend their territory. So if a male comes along, sees another male with a really big red breast, and he might know that he hasn't got a chance, so therefore he might just go away. But they are very territorial, and you can even hear them singing at nighttime in order to defend their territories. But it can also migrate from Scandinavia to Africa, and so some of them actually stop off in Britain and Ireland on their way. So the robins you see now might well be on their way to Africa, so it's just a stop-off point for them. So we're on to the thrushes now, slightly larger birds, and the blackbird is actually a type of thrush very closely related to them. The males are black, so you can see here, the male's pure black with a yellow ring around his eye, with a yellow beak, and you'll often see them on lawns just taking worms and things out. So it's really difficult at this time of year for them when the ground is frozen, and some of them can starve. But the females are brown, so they're much less colourful, and that's possibly because they're the ones on the nest, so they're trying to blend in with leaves and things better. So yes, that's your male and female together. And again, you'll often see them first thing in the morning. And like the robin, they can sing all night. And in some places, you can actually be kept awake at nighttime by the sound of the blackbirds singing through the night. And they're quite a successful bird that can raise 2 to 3 broods per year. So well done them. Now the thrush is similar in size and shape to the blackbirds. There's singing thrushes and missile thrushes, which are hard to separate. But if you see a bird like this, mostly brown, with a tawny coloured breast with these kind of chevrons on it, just call it a thrush and that'll do. At least you'll know that it belongs to that group of birds. Now we're getting closer to the end of the birds now, so we're onto the larger ones. Small ones, and then we'll do larger ones. Black coloured birds, pied wagtail, a really distinctive bird, and one of the first ones that I remember, I think, ever seeing in life, apart from a robin. Just seeing these little strange black and white birds on paths everywhere, like picking up rubbish or little kind of crumbs people have dropped and things. And you'll see them wagging their tail. So they're this black and white streaky appearance, but for me, the most distinctive thing about them is that it's just standing around, bobbing and wagging its tail, which is how it gets its name. So you can get roosts of hundreds of these coming together in wintertime, and they walk around disturbing insects and then eating them when they take flight. So if there's a place of grass or vegetation, they'll walk through, wait till the birds come up, or till the insects come up, and then they'll eat them. Now the starling might be a friend of yours or not. Some of you like to see them, some people don't. I certainly love to see them, but they can be quite frightening when they come down in their hundreds sometimes. So when you're identifying a starling though, what you're looking for is the creamy speckles. So it's mostly what we think of as being black, but if you look closely, you can see it's actually iridescent. It's purple, blue, green, kind of other colors in it as well. So it's really the whole colors of the rainbow, the starling. But they've got these beautiful creamy speckles on it, which gives it its name because these are like stars. Very common and numerous, and in autumn and winter they can form vast groups in the sky called murmurations. You mostly see this in places where they can form these huge numbers, especially like under bridges. I've seen them in Belfast underneath bridges, and they come out in the evening and do these fantastic displays and then just all of a sudden go back underneath the bridge. So that's a real sight to see. And we do get millions coming from Europe every winter here. And yes, you do get these marauding bands of dozens of birds. Sometimes if you throw bread out the back garden for birds to feed upon, you might see 1 or 2 starlings at first, and then it's like that film The Birds, where they all come together and they all flock down upon it and eat everything and then fly away really quickly. So I think for some people they're quite frightening, but they're completely harmless. So the larger black coloured birds then now are the rook. So this is in the crow family. You can identify rooks by the grey patch along the beak. So it's quite a large beak for a start, but it's got this grey patch, which you'll see here. You'll see them walking around on the ground, poking their beaks into the ground and looking for food. They're very sociable, so you rarely see one alone, and pairs can stay together for life. So that's a nice story as well. But you could have some colonies with over 1,000 pairs, and they can make a lot of noise. So together with the jackdaw, which I'll just put up all of its features here, together with jackdaws, rooks can form these huge colonies in the evening. So they actually form, they can come together at night, both species in the same trees, and make a huge amount of noise, just lots of clacking and general bird noises coming out of the trees. And I've certainly heard that from the lime trees in Shankill graveyard. So those are 2 corvid types of birds which can cooperate. The jackdaws, though, they're smaller than a rook or a crow. They've got a blunt black beak, so nothing like the rook at all, but you're really looking for these silver blue eyes, which really give them away. They're quite eerie if you look at them up close. And they will nest in chimneys, buildings, and in tree holes. So that's the jackdaw. And our last big blackbird is the hooded crow. So most of the crows you see in Ireland are what we call the hooded crow, which is a type of crow which has, you can see this grey hood along its body like this. So they're quite interesting birds. They're very intelligent. They can solve puzzles. They can work out how to get food from different places. And so I think the crows have been unfairly maligned, and I think people should reconsider them. Now, I think it's my last group of birds now are the migratory summer birds. And I saved these for the last because they're my favorite, because you know summer's here when you see the first swallow or the house martins coming back. And really the swallows, I think, are amazing birds. Sometimes you might only see them up on high, you'll see them on telephone wires. But if you see one closer to ground, you'll see that they've got this beautiful blue iridescence upon their wings with a red underside to their beak. And I think that that's actually believed to help the young ones to find the beak whenever they're feeding, so they know where their parent is by their red coloration. But the barn swallows, in flight, you might notice that they've got really long tails like this, and they make a chittering noise whenever they're roosting on phone lines. They spend the winter in Africa. So the ones which were with us last summer will now be in Africa, but they're here from April to September. They fly the whole way to Morocco, cross the Sahara Desert and the Congo rainforest, and finish in South Africa. It's an incredible journey, and it's amazing to think that those little birds on our phone lines are now sunning themselves somewhere like that, and they'll be coming back. You know, they'll be coming back in summer, no matter what happens with everything else. Summer will come, and the birds will come with it. But they can live up to 16 years, and they've been depicted in Minoan art from 1500 BC. So I think this was on the island of Santorini, and there are some pictures of them on Crete as well, from Minoan Crete. And so you can just see how well they've captured the beautiful appearance of the swallow there. So they were captured by them, and I am too. And the house martins are somewhat similar, but you can separate them from the swallow by the white rump, which you can see here, and they've got white under their chin as well. But also this is one of the ones which will nest in people's homes, especially if you've got eaves. So you'll see these making these little mud nests, especially below the eaves of buildings. Again, they're summer migrants from Africa, but their populations have fallen by 60% in recent decades. So I know some people don't want them nesting at their homes, but you can actually make surrogate nests for them to hopefully distract them to go somewhere else. It's actually illegal to destroy any bird nests, so just keep that in mind. But just remember also that they have it hard as it is, and the last thing they need is somebody heading down their nest with the handle of a broom or something. So leave them be. They only eat on the wing, so they will catch insects as they fly. And another one, a final one, which is a summer migrant, is the swift. Now the swift, one of my favorite memories from last summer when I was home in Lurgan was just sitting out the back garden on a summer evening with a gin and tonic and listening to the swifts. They've got this beautiful screeching noise that you can hear high in the sky. They remain very high in the sky, but they've got much longer wings than those other species I've mentioned. And they will usually appear over the graveyard on summer evenings, possibly flying the whole way from Belfast every night to feed upon insects. So they're going from Belfast, they're probably getting insects on the way, but they go to Lough Neagh and the areas around that to feed upon the flies and other insects over the loch. And they will do that every single night to get enough food. So the swifts, when you see them, just think, you know, what their journey has been. And they come from Africa too. So we hear them screeching and looping around in the air, and actually they sleep while they're flying. So they never sleep. Half of their brain shuts off and the other half flies. But a really amazing fact about young swifts is that they fly non-stop for over a year. So whenever they leave the nest for the first time, they never land again until the following year when they come back to breed. So those young swifts that have never flown in their life can just work out how to fly, and they just keep going for a whole year. And I think that's pretty amazing. So now we're onto the trees, and we've got these beautiful aerial photographs from Donald Bell to start us off, and you can see the whole extent of the trees here, but there's not a lot of diversity, and I'll go through some of the trees and shrubs you can find in the graveyard just now. Just another photo here, you can see more of the extent of it, and here as well. So again, looking down the street where I grew up, the main feature of it are the lime trees. So these have nothing to do with the lime fruit, and I remember when I was a kid, someone was telling me these are lime trees, but they couldn't explain to me where the fruit was. You know, I wanted to know how I could get a lime, but they didn't know why it was called lime tree or why there was no fruit. but they're nothing to do with the limes that we eat. It's possibly a word derived from Middle English, lend, meaning lenient or yielding, which is possibly refers to the fact that the timber is soft and easily worked. So it's important sometimes with trees to know the origin of these words. It tells you a lot about them. Now the flowers on them are beloved by bees, and I understand from some honeybee keepers that they make very good honey, but bumblebees like them as well. But also I've noticed these a lot in the graveyard too. These little strange, they look infectious or something, you know, it looks like it's erupted with pox. And you can see it on the leaf, all these little red protrusions. That's caused by a thing called the lime nail gall mite. It's completely harmless to the tree, and it's just the mite feeding on, you know, the leaf. Basically, it infects the leaf. The leaf grows this structure, and then it eats the stuff that's inside that, and then they fall off, and it does no harm at all. Within those trees, they're really important habitats for rooks and jackdaws in the evenings because they're so tall and they can fit an awful lot of those birds inside. And the fruit as well are interesting. So it's really just a small seed. But I remember, again, as a kid, picking these up and we would throw them into the air. And then it's like a helicopter. It would turn around in the air and go great distances. And they have evolved this in order to get their seeds to fly further. So they're a really nice way for connecting with some of these trees. Then the Irish yew, to give it its proper name. So yew trees generally are some of the oldest living things, and some are thought to be up to 5,000 years old. And you can see some of the really nice yew trees here, very stately things, but you won't see anything like that in the wild though. Irish yews are a particular type of yew with branches pointing upwards, whereas other yew trees have branches just spreading out every direction. They're quite messy looking. So all Irish yews are actually believed, and I think this is true, are believed to descend from a single mutant tree from Florence Court in County Fermanagh, which was planted in 1967. I think the story goes that a farmer found this type of plant growing on a hill. He took a cutting off it. It was grown at Florence Court, but whenever you try to grow it from seeds, it just reverts back to the old type. So in order to get it, keep it growing this way, they've had to take cuttings. So almost all of them have been descended from that. So even though they're quite ancient trees, these particular ones can't be more than earlier than 1767. People took cuttings from the original trees, and by the 1820s it was very popular and being spread around the world. So that's the Irish yew. But if you look at it, its berries, it's important to know that almost every part of the yew tree is very toxic, which could explain their long life because nothing can eat them without dying. And I understand that cattle and sheep and things can die from eating them as well. The toxins derived from yew are now used in 2 of the most important chemotherapy drugs. So they're so toxic that scientists have actually worked out how to use them to treat people for cancer, which I think is amazing. And there are so many cures like that in nature, but obviously you wouldn't go around eating them yourself. You have to take the chemical form of them. But the red flesh of the seeds is not toxic, and this is so that birds can eat the berries and spread them properly. So that's why that bit isn't toxic, and that's also why the berries are red, for the birds to see them. It is actually a coniferous plant, so it's similar in the same family as pines. However, so it doesn't have a true fruit or berry. So they actually technically still have cones, but the cones have like a scale which grows around them, which makes it look like this, which makes it look like a berry. They're thought to be traditionally planted in graveyards as a symbol for everlasting life, and that possibly goes back to pre-Christian times, so people connected to Christianity and life everlasting, etc. But people believe that they might have been planted even longer than that, and they're associated with some very ancient sites. Now, there are other pines, but none of them are native to Ireland. So we've got several different types of pine trees which simply aren't native to here. Possibly, I reckon that they're Lawson cypress and western red cedar. And they're these types of tree here. So you've got this really bare bark, which can look red sometimes, with these shiny, really hard leaves, just like this. So they're actually native to the Western red cedar is native only to California and Oregon. So when people started to explore those areas, they wanted to take some of these trees back. So they took the seeds and they spread around all parts of Europe. So it's wonderful to think that we've got some plants from the other side of the world just happily at home in Shankill Graveyard. But their history goes back even further. This is a cypress fossil from 34 million years ago. And as you can see, the leaves back then are similar to what they're like now. And there are photographs of the fruits as well, which look very similar to those two. So again, it just puts it all into perspective for you. Now we're on to the holly, possibly not planted here on purpose, so it might have been spread by the birds, but they're easily identified by the spiky green glossy leaves, as you can see here. So I think everybody knows holly. And they have these berries throughout the winter, which are an important source of food for birds. And it's also interesting to note that most hollies have either male or female plants. So that means that only the female plants actually carry berries, but you need a male nearby to fertilize the flowers by bees. So it's important to have both male and female nearby. However, you can get some sometimes which are both sexes at once. And they have these little tiny white flowers in spring, which are really good food for bumblebees and other insects. And again, they're long associated with traditions, so you can protect your home from lightning, witches, poisoning, and general evil by planting a holly outside it. So, and I guess back then people were prey to the elements. You know, if you had a thatched cottage and it was struck by lightning, it was going to go up in flames. So I guess people planted whatever worked. And I think there is some evidence that hollies can be like a lightning rod and take the lightning in. So that could actually have some origin in fact. So hollies are great, and I know sometimes people also plant rowan trees outside their gardens too, to protect their homes from witches. You've got a Christian interest for it, of course. Some Christians say it represents the crown of thorns and blood of Christ, where it gets its name holy, which then became holly. So I think this is one that's possibly from pre-Christian times was a favoured plant and then been adopted by Christianity as one of their favourite plants as well. Now, one of my favourite plants, though, is the hawthorn. And I think for me, Ireland in May is hawthorn blossom. Hedges covered in hawthorns and the whole scent of it filling the air. There's only a few of them, though, in Shankill Graveyard, and I wish there are more. Maybe we could plant some. But you've got these sprays of white flowers in spring, and you've got really 5-petaled little flowers with leaves at the same time and spikes. Now, you might also notice blackthorn in some places. With blackthorn, the flowers come first before the leaves, whereas the leaves come first with hawthorn, and that's a quick way to tell them apart. And of course, you've got the striking deep red berries in autumn, which are, again, really good food for birds. Again, very much linked to folklore, believe that the fairy folk can use them to go between their world and ours, so people wouldn't cut them down. That's why you often see them growing in the middle of trees, or sorry, in the middle of fields, just on their own because there's superstition around them. Now, I'm not sure if I believe that, but I also know that I would never cut one down. And would you cut one down? I'm not sure many people would. So onto the ivy now. So it's obviously not a tree, but it grows up trees and it's quite shrubby, and it doesn't kill them. So don't worry about ivy killing trees. That's not true. It's a complete myth. So don't be killing it around trees, but I know you might need to remove it around monuments. The flowers emerge really late in the summer and are very important for insects before they go back into hibernation, especially butterflies and queen bees. But the berries are also vital for birds. Weight for weight, they contain as much energy as Mars bars. So this is the superfood for birds in the winter. This is what gives them the energy to survive. And again, it just reminds us of how important ivy is for sustaining our wildlife populations. So please don't persecute it as much as you might like to. And also birds will nest within it, as we've seen already. Yes, and as you can see, the mausoleum here is covered in ivy. I think it's a good thing that that's been removed because it can damage that mausoleum. But I think in other places, especially around trees, we should be encouraging the ivy. And then we have the elder, also known sometimes as the boar tree. And I'd never heard the word boar tree until Peter Loughran told me it a few years ago. And I thought he was saying board tree, like a bird tree. But no, it seems to be an Ulster Scots word. And people reckon that it might mean bower tree because people can make like a bower or a little home inside and can be shelter for people on the road. So that's a nice origin for the word of elder trees. Now they've got large plate-like creamy blossoms in springtime filled with scent. I mean, one of the most beautiful scents in spring is the elder. It's so heady and it's not like anything else. The leaves themselves smell really bad, but the flowers are great. They also make these little small blackberries in autumn time, and you can make wine from them if you want, or you can eat them and do all sorts of things. But again, it was another plant sacred to pre-Christians in Ireland, and it was forbidden to cut them apparently. Apparently also the Celtic people made wine from the berries or just ate them because they're very rich in vitamin C. And you had to remember that thousands of years ago, you couldn't just go to the supermarket and get an orange or get some vitamins. Things like this sustained our populations through the toughest times. And so elder and things like that possibly were revered for those reasons because they were sustaining the people. Again, you can plant them near homes to protect you from spirits, or some people say that it actually draws spirits in. So take that whatever way you want. So if you want them or not, plant an elder outside. And also remember that you can make a delicious cordial from the flowers of elder, and it's perfectly easy to do. And I'd recommend looking up some recipes for that. Cherry laurel, another poisonous tree. So there's only one cherry laurel planted in Shankill graveyard along the path, but it takes up a huge area. It's got large, bright green, glossy leaves, and it makes them evergreen. They've got spikes of white flowers in springtime, and they're possibly part of old plantings within, almost like an estate within the graveyard. So they're not native here, but they were possibly used as kind of Victorian plantings within the graveyard. And the leaves, though, are toxic. They contain cyanide, and there are stories of people taking clippings of it to the dump in their car and never making it home because of the cyanide within the leaves. So it's not going to harm you if you walk past it and just brush it, or even break some of the leaves, but just be aware that it's a very toxic plant. That's possibly also how it also inhibits the growth of native plants. So they can grow so large that they block out all of the light and no wildflowers can grow underneath. So if I was to do any management in the graveyard, I might take the cherry laurel back a bit just to let other things grow. So onto the privet now, ubiquitous privet, it's planted everywhere. And I never knew its name until I went to university and I had to work out what plants were called. I used to just think it was that green hedge plant, but it's called privet. It's used everywhere in hedges in Ireland, and there's a hedge of it in the graveyard, as you can see along the side. And on the way in, actually, you can see it overgrowing the path here. And so it can be a bit, it's very important to keep it in check. They're not native to Ireland either. They've got small green leaves year round, and these beautiful white flowers later in summer with a really heady scent that are important for insects as well. Unfortunately, in most privet hedges, though, those flowers never get to bloom because people are always cutting them back. So let them be if you can. And they've got small blackberries later. So just coming towards the end of my talk now, just a few more points to make. So hopefully you've enjoyed learning about some of the trees, and actually you can recognize them from above now. There's all those little Irish yews growing around the place with the lime avenue there too, which is similar to the one in Lurgan Park. But what to do next? So Shankill Graveyard does have a lot of trees, but it's got very low diversity, almost no native trees in it really. Could we maybe plant some more in a respectful way that actually respects the fact that it's a graveyard, maybe a memorial woodland, some more decorative trees like silver birch or wild cherries. Could we put up some bird boxes or even bat boxes within the graveyard to help those? And this kind of work is really important because Northern Ireland has one of the lowest amounts of tree cover in Europe. We only have 8% of land covered in trees versus 30% in France, Germany, and Spain. And about half of our tree cover is non-native Sitka spruce plantations. So Northern Ireland really is the poor man of Europe when it comes to tree cover. And I think we should all be doing something to remedy that. Trees have been cut down for agriculture and development, and this really affects our birds and mammals and woodland wildflowers. And half of Northern Ireland's bird species have declined significantly over recent times, so we should all be doing our bit to help them out. So planting and maintaining woodlands can also capture carbon from the atmosphere. So it's taking carbon in, storing it inside the wood, and that can help with climate change. So this is another way we can contribute to the ecological problems we're seeing now. We also provide cover for birds and small mammals, and they also need less maintenance. So it's not like grass, which you need to cut every couple of weeks. Trees, you just plant them and let them get on with it. And you might need to thin them out occasionally, but they need a lot less work to keep them in shape. I want everybody to try to get outdoors as well. I think during COVID-19, all the lockdowns and things, I've never seen as many people out on the streets walking. It's as if they've discovered walking for the first time, which is fantastic. So, and we all know that getting outside is really great for our health, both mental and physical. So get outside, explore the graveyard, and just make it your own. This can help reduce anxiety and mild depression. And obviously, if you've got larger problems, you do need to see a doctor. But I found that many people have found that just getting outside into the fresh air can take your mind off things and make you feel much better. Sunlight also helps our bodies to make vitamin D, which is for a healthy immune system and bones and skin. So actual sunlight on our skin helps us to make that. And sunlight getting into our eyes also makes serotonin in our brains, which is also known as the happy hormone. It makes us feel better. So these things are proven facts. Another fact, though, is that 3/4 of UK children spend less time outdoors every day than prison inmates. I think that's a shocking statistic, and I'm really depressed every time I hear that, actually. And so get our kids outside a lot more. And this is a photograph of my nephew, Jason. He and I went out at Christmas time to Oxford Island. I taught him about the birds. Here he's got a great tit on his hand, and he actually fed the birds from his hand. And I think it's really important that kids have that connection with nature early on. I think I benefited from it, and I'm sure kids today could too. And as well, you know, there's the perennial problem of kids spending too much time on screens. They spend twice as long playing on screens than outdoors, which I think is just was shocking. We all need to do our bit to get outside and explore these places. So if you want to find out more, this is a really great weekend for it, because the RSPB, the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, has their big garden bird watch happening this weekend. It goes from the 29th to the 31st of January. All you have to do is spend an hour out in your garden counting the birds, and you report back the numbers. So you can find out about that on their website. But also go to the Woodland Trust website. You can download a free ID app for trees, free tree ID app, yeah. And also you'll find out how you can get free trees for schools and community groups, because they're really helping people to plant more trees. So I'd recommend those two organisations. And just to say thanks to Isabel and everybody in the Friends of Shankill Graveyard group, especially those people, including Paul May, who allowed me to use their photos tonight. I couldn't have done it without those, so I really appreciate that. Keep up the great work, and share any photos you see on the Shankill Friends of Shankill Graveyard page, and we can identify them for you, and it might even be some new sightings for the area.